I'm Johnny, by the way. This is JohnnyGMs, and let us enter the tundra together. Walk amongst the snowy peaks. Hopefully we won't get lost along the way. So the first creature on today's list is the frost salamander, as you can see here. This creature is an elemental and is native to the plane Frostfell. It's a dimension that sits in the middle of the dimension of air and the dimension of water. They seek and hunt warm-blooded creatures after all. It is what they crave more than anything. Frost salamanders are aggressively attracted to heat, to the point where they will hunt down settlers. They will prey on settlements, hamlets, and towns of the like. They will stick to frigid conditions, but they will hunt down these creatures. In fact, in some instances, they find themselves at campfires or forges, mistakenly thinking that this is a creature that they are hunting down. This attraction to the heat tends to also be a weakness to the salamanders, as azers from the elemental plane of fire, as you can see here, tend to hunt them down. And by doing so, they use fire to attract these creatures and lure them into traps. And then they tend to take their hides and fangs to make as weapons and armor. And like, let's say an idea, right? The party have been hired by a town to take out these salamanders. There's some in the hills. They might have a lair nearby. And the blacksmith, the armor smith, perhaps says, if you can bring me back their pelts or their fangs, perhaps I can make you weapons. Or perhaps cold resistant armor. Maybe boots of the winter, for example. If you come back and you manage to bring and procure those goods for me, I will craft you those items in this harsh winter set area. That could be fantastic. Just a little side story. Salamanders are immune to cold, but they are vulnerable to fire. They have an icy breath that emanates from them. It requires a constitution save. It deals a hefty amount of cold damage. They are a CR9 creature, to be fair. And if they take fire damage, they regain their breath weapon back. That's actually a great synergy with their weakness, because if you attack them with fire, it fuels their abilities. Something else to mention is that they carve out icy caves. They attract unseasoned adventurers and travelers in these caves. And when they sleep, the salamander strikes. So we're on to our second creature for today, Bjorhag. I think it's a Bjorhag. I have no idea how you actually pronounce this thing, because I'll show you right here how it's spelled. So as a DM with a bit of experience, you probably know what a hag is. They're kind of these creepy, twisted, grotesque looking women who use really dark magics. They use dark rituals and they make bargains with mortals, usually to the mortal's detriment, because the hag just loves to torment people. The Bjorhag more than anybody. And this is definitely a villain who is very sadistic and cruel. And that would be really interesting for maybe a horror campaign. Bjorhags tend to be centered around wintry areas. They tend to live in mountains where the snow and the cold is at its peak. They usually tend to live nearby settlements, so that not only can they torment those people, they can batter them by using their cold magic. They love seeing mortals desperately trying to survive in these conditions. So I have Volo's guide here, and I want to look up something quick here. Here's the Bjorhag in all her glory, as you can see. Woo! But in this case, it says here, a Bjorhag's skin is blue-white, like that of a person who is frozen to death. Her hair is pale white, and she is emaciated, as if she were a person who had survived winter by eating bark and leather. Her eyes are pale, and surrounded by dark, bruise-colored flesh. A Bjor carries a twisted grey wooden staff, which she can ride like a flying broom, and augments her magical powers. These creatures revel in acts of pure selfishness. When a greedy merchant decides to hoard food, even if it's completely unnecessary, meanwhile there are people outside starving to death, she revels in that. When someone murders someone and takes their winter coat, purely for that reason alone. Or this one was an example, and it is rough if you know what this creature is. That's let's chop down a dryad's tree and use it as firewood. Yeah, that's pretty messed up, honestly. But it really shows the cruelty of this creature. Their ability, called Maddening Feast, allows them to, when a creature has dropped dead in combat, at least for 1 minute, and the hag is 5 feet away from them, the hag can pick them apart, tear them apart limb from limb. And if any creature looks their way when this happens, like for instance, one of your friends was downed in a combat, in that instance, I would rule it that the hag could attack them when they're downed and not just dead, because I think that would add a lot more tension to the game. But, you know, it depends on the DM really. And in that instance, the creature would look that way, and they have to roll a wisdom save because it is so horrific to look at that it terrifies them. If they fail a save, not only are they frightened, they're incapacitated. They speak complete gibberish, and the DM controls their movement, so they just move around erratically. And if you really wanted to add something a little bit more interesting, I'll give the page number here from the Dungeon Master's Guide, but you could add madness to them. You could give them long-term madness, or perhaps indefinite madness from this, as the book suggests that this is what happens when you look upon them tearing apart this creature. It's brutal, and that would just fracture anyone's mind. It would drive someone insane. And so maybe using these features would actually be kind of interesting. It would give some thematic elements and maybe a detriment to your characters. So that would be really interesting. So I definitely use a beer hag if you wanted a real cruel, evil character for your campaign. And it's awesome because in Volo's Guide to Monsters, to which they come from, they give you hints on how to run hags. They give you lair ideas. And there's just content in there if you just want to run a hag in general. So that's phenomenal. So on to our third one. And this one's a little bit different because it comes from a different book. And as you can kind of see behind me here, you see the Tome of Beasts 1 and 2. These books are by Kobold Press. And I'll be honest, I bought these books purely because I thought the monsters in the Monster Manual are a bit tame. The ones that are Mordenkainens and Volos, I hadn't really looked into, to which I feel kind of bad now, but they are really good. And I think they add like a lot more variety, a lot more interesting abilities to them. These monsters are nothing like you've seen before. They're so bizarre and crazy, and the art really reflects that. And in this case, I wanted to talk about this creature here, the Snow Terror. As you can see, this guy's a snowman, a creepy ass snowman. And not only are they a creepy ass snowman, they are a fiend. They come from the abyss, the cold layer of the abyss, where they taunt and humiliate lesser fiends. And additionally, if people somehow manage to find themselves in that layer, they are whipped away by the snows and overwhelmed by those icy conditions. But because they can't really get a lot of people in that domain, like a lot of people don't end up showing up in those places, they travel to the material plane to cause havoc there instead. And that's not even mentioning what they can do. So they disguise themselves as snowmen, obviously in settlements. And in this case, it's actually really interesting because you can have a kid walk up to it and take like the stones off its stomach, and it won't do anything. It'll play the part perfectly, and it will never show that it's this evil creature. It will wait patiently until it can single out one target. And when it does so, it grapples them, attacks them, deals acid damage, piercing damage, and then devours them. You have to deal a certain amount of damage and they might regurgitate the creature, but if they don't, the creature gets dissolved in their acidy stomach. And when it does that, it can take on the shape of that person. And thus, it infiltrates the lives of people in the town. So it has shape-changing abilities, so it can polymorph into that of the person that it devoured. So yeah, additionally it has a terrifying visage, so if a creature is within it, it can frighten them. Yeah, that's pretty scary stuff. Imagine a quest where people keep going missing in the village, in the hamlet, in the town, and the adventurers have been sent to try to stop this. And it turns out to be these demonic snowmen with these unholy demonic eyes and shark-like teeth that are devouring these people and replacing them bit by bit in the town. That now would be an interesting quest. And it would be quite a twist in the events of the story. Here's the page number, and well, Tome of Beasts 2 that this comes from. Absolutely phenomenal. So on to our next one. This is the Hoarfrost Drake. The Hoarfrost Drake tend to be servants to white dragons, and they're not rivals or such. They tend to just serve those white dragons. And so there isn't really any hostility towards them. Of course, though, the Hoarfrost Drake believes themselves so cocksure that they will never fail their master. But if doing so, they will meet a quick end. So something I really love about the Hoarfrost Drake is their breath weapon. It's not like your typical do freeze breath, that's it. Lots of damage, ha ha ha, you know. Why did I do that? So what I really like about the Hoarfrost Drake is their breath weapon. They also have some really other cool features, but I really love their breath weapon because it's not just damage. It's not just a con save and they take cold damage. They also have to make an additional dexterity save. And what is this for? Well, creatures have to make a dex save or they will drop their weapon, shield, perhaps even magical focus. But I love this feature simply because it adds something different. It's not just pure damage, it kind of creates a difficult terrain as well. And so if someone was to slip and fall, so you know what I really love about the Hoarfrost Drake? I love their breath weapon. I think it's different than what you expect from dragons. It's not just cold damage and that's it. And that's why I love it so much. I love effects that blind creatures or knock them prone or stun them or something like that. I love those types of features. And apart from spells, I feel like they're not used as much. You definitely get like knocked prone a lot and such like that and grapple. But I just love when you get to see these features be more heavily focused. And in this case, after their constitution save against, the cold damage, they have to make a dex save in order to prevent their weapons, shields, perhaps even magical foci from dropping from their hands. I love this feature. And additionally, they create a sheet of ice that if, you slip and fall, you're knocked prone, reduces speed by half, and you have to make a dex check every time you're walking on the ice. So it's really great for melee fighters. Range fighters and maybe spellcasters, it's not going to matter maybe too much, but it's kind of a cool way to change it up. And maybe you do drop their magical focus, so maybe it is kind of a detriment, Additionally, the Hoarfrost Drake is kind of a slippery little bugger. Every time you try to grapple onto them, they have actually advantage against grapple checks, and they try to contort their bodies, and additionally, as a reaction, they can make an attack, a retaliatory attack, I think it's called. Also, Hoarfrost Drakes are vulnerable to fire, and when they do take this damage, they will focus all their ire on whoever attacked them with that fire. So if it was a wizard, well, we all know wizards are like tissue paper, so goodbye, wizard. We knew thee well. So that's gonna do it today for the Tome of Beasts. We're going on to our last monster in a minute, but I definitely want to suggest that you get these books, especially if you're a DM and you're kind of fed up with the monsters they have, because yeah, they're great, but these monsters kind of give you that extra added flavor. Like, there's a monster made of shark jaws. Like, it is a construct made of shark teeth. And then there is another monster that is a dragon, but it's a tree. It's a tree dragon. There's even this like Aurora Borealis ghostly spirit thing. It's so weird. There's some like odd choices in these books, but that's kind of what makes them so different, and I love that about it. So I'd highly suggest that you go pick up these books. And you can just pick them up on Amazon. They're not too bad. So our last monster for today is the Cold Light Walkers. These monsters were introduced in Icewind Dale. And Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden, fantastic book, might I add, and definitely an adventure I really want to run in the future. Definitely like more of a survival-based setting. Let me stop gushing over Icewind Dale and let's talk about the monster. So, the Cold Light Walker is an undead creature. It's a CR5. It's immune to cold damage, and it doesn't have really like any like super unique abilities. It has like a ray of ice that it can shoot, and it can sort of just attack you like just like, you know, it's like, great zombie impression, Johnny. Doing great, buddy. Here's the Coalite Walker, as you can see, and something I love about them is that they have this white light emanating from their faces, to the point where you can't even really make out their facial features, and their hands and limbs can glow as well, and as a bonus action, they can sort of expose that light and blind their enemies. It lasts until the end of their next turn, I think. And I could just imagine these creatures in like this icy tundra. Like you're escorting these merchants through this snowstorm. It's hard to see, and suddenly you see these lights coming from every which direction. And suddenly you just think, oh, it could be other caravans, it could be other people, they're coming to help us, right? Through this snowstorm. But then suddenly these rays of ice shoot offwards, and suddenly guards, the merchants are attacked, and instantly frozen solid, and turned to ice cubes. Quite literally. And something that I really like about it is if you're turned to ice and die, you can't be thawed until like 9 days later. It's kind of like a weird feature, but it's really interesting. So it kind of makes like resurrection really difficult. Like revivify might not end up working on you, you know, stuff like that. It's really interesting. But I love undead, absolutely love them. And sometimes the simpler, the better. And this is exactly the case. So that's it for today. And I will say that Icewind Dale is a definite must pick if you want to like pick up some icy cold creatures. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I had a lot of fun making it, but I'll talk to you guys later, okay?